too tough. And you know.
Hello, my name is Bird Running Water, and I belong to the Cheyenne and Mescalero Apache nations. I'm honored to be welcoming you to our reimagined Sundance Film Festival, coming from the indigenous lands of North America. I'd like to pay a special tribute to the Ute Tribal Nation, the Lenni Lenape Nation, and the Tongva people. We thank them all for giving Sundance Institute our homes. I would also like to honor the indigenous lands and people from where you are joining us. Please enjoy the show. Ikahet Ahanaka.
The saying goes, sticks and stones may break your bones. The saying goes, words can never hurt you. But I want to talk about the density of language, or how reality can be obscured by a sentence, or how a sentence can be obscured by the color of your skin. Do you see how easy it is to manipulate humanity? I want to talk about foundations. 39 people gathered to codify the United States. 11 of those 39 people owned slaves. What happens when we call them founding fathers instead of colonizers? I want to talk about shifting trends in representation and the cost to indigenous people who still protect the land. I want to talk about the emotional impact of Black trauma in media, but the rent is due, and Black Lives Matter is trending again. I want to talk about traditions, how much we focus on the minstrel show performance, but not the people who tarred themselves and took the stage and wrote the script and filled the stands. Do you see how dangerous it is to disappear wrongdoing when those in control of the narrative don't have to take responsibility for their actions? For example, you say transatlantic slave trade, you say triangular, and immediately the mind starts focusing on the directions of the boats and not the stolen histories decaying below the deck. You see how quickly the water runs red. Unnaming is a process of manipulation. For example, if I call a human a prisoner, immediately you stop questioning the legitimacy of the cage. Hocus pocus. Poof goes contact with the outside world. What happens when we call the Women's March a protest, and the protest a riot, and the riot a lawless place? Do you see how the sex worker goes missing in the space between legislation and false morality? Do you see Black trans women leading movements and being snatched from the face of them? What happens when grieving Black folks are labeled looters, when mobs of white people are not labeled patriots, even though they are doing the most American thing? When we call it police brutality instead of genocide, when we call them accusers instead of survivors, when patriarchy makes itself small enough to sit between your teeth, what happens? When words like revolution and abolition are more forbidden than words like lethal injection or life without the possibility. And maybe this is just all what happens when we've decided the truth is too large to fit in our mouths. And maybe it's less about who's at the table, but more about questioning why the table exists. And I don't have the answers, but I invite you to a moment of reflection, to interrogate assumptions you've digested without flinching, manufactured lies you've repeated without blinking. I invite you to imagine a reality, a moment, a space where oppressed people don't ask for permission, don't dress up in palatable renditions of themselves, and still have all the resources needed to tell their own stories, to call things by their proper names.
Welcome, everyone, to A Place in the Sun, Decentering Whiteness in the Public Imagination. Words matter. It's a bold mandate, a collective vision, a call for an essential shift in the national and global narrative. And today's forum asks, how do we get there? I'm Pat Mitchell, chair of the Sundance Board and a trustee of the Skoll Foundation. And it's my privilege to invite you now to join this conversation, to listen and to learn together about how we shape a new narrative in all of our work. The words of poet Darius Simpson set the tone for us, the urgency to shift from the narrative that has sustained systemic racism, that has misrepresented and underrepresented communities of color. The narrative that is too often on our screens, on our museum walls, in our books, and is at the root of racial injustice and the disenfranchisement of so many communities around the world. Disenfranchisement isn't just about who gets to tell the stories, although authorship is a critical component to realizing the change. Who has access, opportunity to tell their stories? And that's about power. Who has it, and how is it held and withheld? For far too long, the narrative power of storytelling has been held by people who look a lot like me. So what happens when historically underrepresented groups tell their own stories? What does it actually mean to decenter whiteness and decolonize storytelling? In this forum, we're asking those questions and others to challenge all the barriers to a new narrative across a range of media, a new narrative that many believe could mitigate and even heal racial trauma. That could be an important step towards repairing generations of harm from the white-centeredness in storytelling. Such a shift begins by getting out of our comfort zones as artists and as audiences, to speak up and show up with whatever personal power or privilege, to support the storytellers and their creative choices, to claim, as the title of this forum suggests, a place in the sun, a rightful place, a place in the light, and more opportunities to be the light, as Amanda Gorman instructed us in her powerful poem on Inauguration Day. On that day, we witnessed a shift in power and leadership in the United States. And on that day, many of us felt hope that a new national narrative would come to replace the one of injustice, disenfranchisement, and unfulfilled promises of a democracy. So on this day, and in this festival, and through the work of every one of us, we have an opportunity to be the shift, to tell the stories that decenter whiteness, stories that light the way forward to a more inclusive and just world. What role would philanthropy play? We're asking that question at the Skoll Foundation, how to support storytelling across a range of media to change the narrative. And at the Sundance Institute, we're asking, how can we better support the careers and practices of artists of color and leverage every platform, including this festival, to offer artists and audiences opportunities to see, hear, engage, and be with authentic and powerful stories that challenge the power structures, prevailing culture, and ultimately change us and all our communities. Sundance and the Skoll Foundation formed a Stories of Change partnership, and going forward, we recognize and appreciate the collaboration of new convening partners at New Prophet, Indian Collective, Illuminative, and the Latinx House. I want to express personal gratitude to them and to the participants who agreed to have this sometimes discomforting, but absolutely essential conversation about the role that each of us can play in taking up the challenge and the promise of today's forum. To lead the conversation, I can't think of anyone with a more authentic, more powerful voice as a writer, an activist, and now a member of the Skoll Foundation team leading our racial equity work, Jimmie Briggs. Hi, Jimmie, and thank you for including me in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Pat, for your longtime friendship. And and for the thought partnership, leadership, and courage, sincerely, in hosting this conversation. I think early on, as we talked about it, you recognized the necessity of all of us being a part of it. This program, for those who are in attendance now, is a second iteration of the Skoll Foundation's Town Hall series on intersectional racial justice. Our first, The Color of COVID-19, Disparate Impact, and Equitable Response, occurred last fall. Decentering Whiteness in Public Imagination. This may be seen by some as a provocative and intriguing statement, perhaps especially so for some of our white sisters and brothers. For clarity's sake, when we say decentering whiteness, we're not calling for erasure or subjugation of white people. We simply want to interrogate and hopefully permanently dismantle the intergenerational myth that the celebrated lives, dreams, security, or successes of white people and associated whiteness hold greater primacy not only in our collective social narrative, but our inner ones as well. In an essay titled Mourning for Whiteness, published in the New Yorker magazine 2 weeks after the 2016 election, Nobel Prize-winning laureate Toni Morrison observed that unlike any nation in Europe, the United States holds whiteness as the unifying force. Here, for many people, the definition of Americanness is color. I sometimes wonder how many Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, and Black women and men read William Faulkner and died believing, as he wrote, that one drop of non-white blood was worse than incest in the family. Died believing that the roles of maids and gardeners on Broadway stages or television screens speaking broken English was the best they would ever get. Died knowing John Wayne wasn't the hero in all those Westerns where white men painted their bodies red. Or died feeling shamed by caricatures of Blackness portrayed by Hattie McDaniel, Stephen Fetchit, and Mantan Moreland, roles they were compelled to portray. Toni Morrison also noted in her Nobel laureate address that narrative is radical, creating us at the very moment it is created. For too long, narrative has been weaponized to diminish dignity, repress imagination and dreams, as well as justify brutality and violence. Now more than ever, we must see narrative as a pathway for justice and equity. The three visionaries, Afro-Latinx, Black, and Indigenous, whom we've invited to be with us today, are without question credible messengers of authentic, inclusive, humanistic narratives, which plainly and simply show life as it is for all of us. I want to acknowledge and honor my colleagues in the effort to realize this town hall, namely Jessica Flutie, Sierra Gonzalez, Phil Collis, Gabriel Diamond, Darius Simpson, Robin Belinsky, as well as our partners at Oxford Digital Media. Here now are our convening partners.
Wonderful. Such a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Tulane Montgomery. I'm with New Profit. Such a gift to be in this company at this time. I want to offer a couple of points about this. You know, we're going to dig into what we mean when we say decolonizing the imagination. We hear that term and phrase a lot these days. And this session is about really understanding what that means, what it will require, how we'll know that that's the direction we're moving in. The thing I want to speak to is why now? With so much work to do, why is this the conversation to have at this time? And I'll offer it's because as human beings, what we do is we make meaning. That is what we do. And in an increasingly connected global community, we know that narratives and stories dictate beliefs, and beliefs dictate and guide actions. They guide opportunity. They guide the allocation of resources. And so we understand that white supremacy is actually a trance that benefits none of us. It is a toxic religion, and the way to pierce through the numbness that white supremacy demands is for us to advance self-determined storytelling. Such a pleasure to be with all of you today.
Hamadakiapi. Na Hamadakiapi, Nick Tilson, Amachiapi, Trontea Washte Nape Chuzapolo. My name is Nick Tilson. I'm the president and CEO of the Indian Collective. I'm calling in from my home community here on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And we're honored to be a convening partner today. And the Indian Collective is a national organization dedicated to building the collective power of Indigenous people. And we do this work through challenging the status quo and creating new systems. And we do this through grant making, community organizing, lending, capacity building, and movement building, as well as narratives, as well as narrative building. And that's where it comes in to us as Indigenous people. It's really, really important as we build cross-intersectional movements with each other at this time in history, that we build narratives and movements that are a reflection of our struggle and a reflection of our reality. And so we're honored to do that work here at the Indian Collective through the movement building work that we do and through the grant making work that we do in supporting artists in the multiple different ways. You'll hear from Princess, who's one of the board members of the Indian Collective, talk about her journey both as an artist and an activist today. And just want to say that the honor to be a convening partner along with Illuminative and New Prophet and Skoll and all of the partners. And I'm excited to be having these real, authentic conversations at this moment in history. So, Wopila Tanka Achichapalo Doksha Ke.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to join. I'm Monica Ramirez. I'm the co-founder and president of the Latinx House. The Latinx House is an organization that was created for those who care about the Latinx community in the United States. There are 60 million of us in this nation, and this house was created to celebrate our culture and those who make the content that tells the stories about our community. Tulane posed the question, why now? And we posed the question, why here? We launched the Latinx House at Sundance Film Festival last year. And the reason that we launched it at Sundance is because we understand that Sundance is a gateway to the public imagination for people to see the stories on film about our communities. And we know the consequence of not telling the full story of our community has resulted in grave harm to our community. So we are grateful for this conversation. We are thankful to Skoll and to Sundance for the opportunity to be partners, and we look forward to what will come from this conversation as we build together. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Crystal Echohawk. I'm a citizen of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma, and I am founder and executive director of Illuminative. And our mission is really to build power and to advance equity and self-determination for our people by amplifying contemporary Native voices and stories and issues. And really, this is such an important conversation to be having, and particularly as we look at this through the lens of Native peoples. And our representation is less than 0.4% across TV and film. And when we first conducted our research in 2015, that was the number we found, and Nielsen just confirmed at the end of 2020 that that number has not moved in over 4 years. 2021 is going to be a breakout year with 4 new Indigenous television shows hitting the screen, which is incredibly exciting. But our Indigenous voices, our stories are still sorely lacking in film. And so this is why it's so exciting. And Sundance has been such an important pioneer and leader over the last 20 plus years and really uplifting Indigenous representation. And now is the time. And really through the research that we've more recently done through the Indigenous Futures Survey, of which Skoll is a proud partner and investor in that work, we have found that the majority of Native Americans across this country are still facing exceptional levels of racism and discrimination, and that we are exhausted and we are done with our erasure in media and entertainment. And so this is such a powerful conversation, and I want to thank our convening partners and the Skoll Foundation and the Sundance Film Festival for creating this important space, and hopefully, to really, for all of us to join together in these pathways moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Crystal, Nick, Monica, Tulane. Your allyship has been so critical from the beginning of our town hall series. And for this one in particular, I really want to acknowledge and honor your thought leadership and just your affirmation of what we're trying to do here. First, I want to bring on Dr. Ariana Curtis. Dr. Curtis is Director of Content for Race, Community, and Our Shared Future at the Smithsonian Institution. Hi, Ariana.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I feel very honored to be part of this conversation.
Oh, we're very honored to have you, and very blessed to have you, Ariana. I want to ask you a question. If you could just share with us, I mean, and we know that you're the Director of Content of Race and Community at the Smithsonian, but I'd love to hear more about, as an Afro-Latinx woman, how you elevate, narrative threads, how you elevate visibility and voices of communities that particularly the Black and Latino communities that aren't really held up very often in museum spaces.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my current title is Director of Content for Smithsonian's Race, Community, and Our Shared Future initiative. I'm also Curator for Latinx Studies at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I've been a curator there for 4 years. And the 4 years prior, I was Curator for Latino Studies at the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. And so very proudly taking this title of Curator of Latinx Studies, but really centering Blackness in the work that I do. And I did that at Anacostia, and I continue to do that at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. In the spirit of how you've described this event, centering Blackness does not mean that my work is Black exclusive. And so I think that's just a very important point, particularly to make within Latinx spaces, because Latinx is not a race. And we understand that just as Black people are marginalized worldwide, Blackness is marginalized within Latinidad as well. And so being able to move that identity, those experiences from the margin to the center, and still talk about all of us has been critical to the work that I do, particularly as a curator and opening space for the fullness of human experiences and the fullness of Black experiences.
Thank you so much, Ariana. I'm curious, in the midst of this, almost nearly year-long pandemic, how have you been able to still make your work accessible to the population that would normally come in person to the Smithsonian in DC?
Yeah, well, I think for me, one of the exciting things is I think a lot of people didn't actually know what I did before the pandemic. And so with the galleries actually being closed, being able to say, no, curatorial work is far beyond exhibitions, right? We are actually building the collections. We are actually setting the frameworks for what narratives have space in which spaces. And so, being able to take a step back to not travel as much, because we really, as curators, are on the road a lot, meeting with people, collecting things, and being able to take inventory of what's currently in our collection and how we're making sure that is publicly accessible, right? So exhibitions are but one way that you're able to experience museum collections. At the National Museum of African American History and Culture and elsewhere in the Smithsonian. You can just search collections. You can put in keywords and see what the institution holds around any particular movement or topic. During the pandemic, we were able to launch the Latinx Collections Portal at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so personally, that has been wonderful for me to say, hey, this is actually what I do. These are the types of things that I collect and the stories that I'm able to tell, irrespective of the exhibition that might be in the physical museum space. So I think just having people have a broader sense of what curation means has been really powerful.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ariana. I know we have a video to show for people who may not fully understand the role the Smithsonian Institution plays and really kind of maintaining our collective historical memory. So maybe we'll cue the video now and then we'll come back.
America, 1846, an audacious idea to grow and broadcast more knowledge than the world had ever seen. With an eye to the future, that dream was the Smithsonian, your Smithsonian. Expanding the portrait of a people, revealing the building blocks of life, to discover new species and save those we already know. A knowledge powerhouse with purpose and a community mindset. Inspiring a new generation to learn from the past. Speak up. Be civic. serve a nation. So that together we can step into the future with optimism. No dreams deferred.
Wonderful. Ariana, the Smithsonian Institution is now led by Dr. Lonnie Bunch, who I believe is the first non-white person to lead the institution. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first non-white male. The first
non-white male.
Also to lead the institution.
In 2021, January 3rd, 2021, I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you see the role of the Smithsonian as an agent and lever towards achieving racial justice and equity in this country?
Yeah, well, I hope people got a sense of the energy from that video. So this is the 175th anniversary of the Smithsonian as an institution, right? And I think the way that the video was created and just the energy that I'm hoping that you feel from that is that, yes, our mission is the increase and diffusion of knowledge. And with that, we really do want to spark change and we want to help build an equitable shared future. But we also understand that we need to change in order to maintain our trustworthiness as an institution, to maintain the public confidence in the scholarship that we provide. And some of that is acknowledging our own history as an institution and acknowledging that we can do better, that we can be better, and that we're willing to do things differently. And I think the launch, the June 2020 launch of the Race Community in Our Shared Future initiative is evidence of that. That we acknowledge that there are things internally and externally that can be different, and that we as a trusted community resource can help usher in that kind of change. And that it's our responsibility, frankly, to do so.
Ariana, thank you so much. I'm going to pivot to your colleague, our partner in the conversation, Charles D. King, but we'll come back together as a group imminently. Thank you so much. Charles, it's great to meet you, great to have you as part of this conversation. Very excited to be connected with you, a fellow HBC grad. Charles D. King is CEO and founder of Macro, a former Hollywood agent, now producer of such films as the upcoming Judas and the Black Messiah, Mudbound, and Just Mercy. It's a pleasure to have you, Charles. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Charles,
I'd love. Oh, please. I'm sorry.
I'm excited to be here and really looking forward to this.
Yeah, and we're so glad to have you, especially with the premiere of Judas and the Black Messiah, coming a few days later in Sundance, the Sundance Festival. Charles, I'm curious if you can share with us, and I've read a lot about you and your work and watched talks you've given in anticipation of this conversation here. I'd love you to talk a little bit about how you decided that films, that cinema, was going to be your chosen path. How movie making, movie producing, would be the tool you use to elevate the experience, the lives, the visibility of the Black experience.
It's a long story, but I knew that I grew up with an interest in both community, civil rights activism, as well as the arts. And the intersection of that happened somewhere during my time in college. And as I started thinking about my longer term career aspirations and the best use of a combination of my interest and skill set, there was someone that I was introduced to in the entertainment industry who said, "You're studying political science at Vanderbilt, and obviously you have an interest in entertainment. Have you ever thought about entertainment law?" And frankly, I didn't know anything about practicing entertainment law, but this light bulb went off in my head from a television show that I watched growing up with my mother called LA Law. And it was the image of this character played by Blair Underwood on that show, this strong, this intelligent, this aspirational character that I really gravitated towards. And I said, oh, wait a minute, like that Blair Underwood character. And then really just put the bug in my ear in my head to one day go to law school with a focus on entertainment. And then through just the course of growing up as African-American man, the experiences I dealt with, being harassed, pulled over by police officers, the things that we all know, the things that have been highlighted clearly through the use of, cell phones. And now that these things that we've lived with growing up, Jimmie, the world is now able to see this. And so when I went to law school at Howard, I went there with an interest in entertainment and civil rights. And so during my time as an agent, behind the scenes as a partner at WME, I looked at the role that I had as almost as a conduit for shepherding and bringing in artists and storytellers, both from a creative lens, but also economically empowering them in the way that I was able to have an entrepreneurial approach to representing the various artists that I work with, including people like Tyler Perry and others, who then created business models that have transformed our industry. And ultimately, I knew that the real power will come from being able to finance and tell our own stories, much like what was touched on in the early stages of our panel discussion here. And so that's when I ultimately left and launched Macro, understanding the power of media to have those aha moments that I had as a young man for people to recognize their true selves and to be able to see the holistic versions of who we are as a people, as well as also to build bridges and bring people together. And so I thought that if we could do this on a global level with people of color at the center of it, but we could create real change, and we could also do it in a way that was economically empowering the community at the same time. And so it was really a life path of things that happened that really introduced me and sent me down this direction. And but yes, ultimately it was each one of these things growing up that led me to this place.
Right. Thank you, Charles. I want to with those who are in attendance with us in this conversation, I want to share the trailer for the film which I mentioned previously, Judas and the Black Messiah, which is the most recent production, which is premiering here at Sundance. So we'll cue the trailer and then come back.
Fantastic.
Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois Black Panther Party.
Repeat after me. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.
You're looking at 18 months for the stolen car, 5 years for impersonating a federal officer, or you can go home.
The Black Panthers are forming a rainbow coalition of oppressed brothers and sisters of every color.
Their aim is to sow hatred and inspire terror.
I will learn all that I can.
These ain't no terrorists.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom. I'm gonna die for the people 'cause I live for the people. I live for the people 'cause I love the people.
Wow, Charles, I've seen the film. I've seen it twice already. Every time I see that trailer, I get chills. Thank you for bringing.
I get
that
chills
to us.
too, man. They really did a great job with that trailer. No, it's powerful.
Yeah, I was shook the first time I saw the film. So I encourage everyone who has not seen it, watching now, to please watch it as soon as you can. Charles, I want to ask you one other question before we pivot and bring in our colleague Princess Johnson. Several years ago, recently, Oscars So White became a hashtag. I don't know if you say a campaign or a movement in Hollywood to push for diversity, for Black actors, actresses, producers, creatives, as well as those of other ethnic and racial groups. I'm curious, we're a few years on now, since that was elevated. I'm just curious, from your perspective, what scorecard would you give Hollywood? How is the industry doing to deepen its commitment and connection to non-white communities?
I think we've made a lot of progress since Oscar So White, the first year, I think it was 2015. That happened a month or so after I launched Macro. And then I believe there was a repeat of Oscar So White a couple of years later. Oscar So White was symbolic of a larger challenge and issue around Hollywood, and less, I think, about the Academy, although that, there were issues there as well. It was more about the opportunity for more of these stories told by and from this community. And what we've seen after this global success of films like Black Panther or movies like Crazy Rich Asians, I think Hidden Figures has come since then. Macro's launched since then. So many television shows from Atlanta to Insecure have all had tremendous success, both in streaming platforms and cable. And what we've seen now is with the streaming wars, more and more of an opportunity for these storytellers to tell their stories, and with less and less interruption or interference from decision makers. And what we've seen is the creativity from that. I've seen, dozens of companies that are looking to raise capital and make movies and television in a similar space of what Macro, the role that we've have had since we launched. And that's part of what I was hoping for, was to be part of a sea change. And I do see change. I think we still have a very long way to go, but there's been movement. There was definitely movement within the Academy. They made major moves to expand the membership base of the Academy. And I think that they've done some incredible work there. And I think that it will, over time, be more representative of those of us working in the industry, as well as hopefully the larger consumer base.
Thank you so much, Charles. I appreciate that response, the fullness of the response, especially. I want to go and pause with you and go to Princess, if I may. Princess Johnson will be joining yourself, Dr. Ariana Curtis, in the conversation. Hi, Princess.
Hi.
Princess Johnson, the creative producer of Molly of Denali, also a board member of Indian Collective. Such a pleasure to have you. I think I told you this, Princess, when we first spoke on the phone. I know you're based in Alaska, but when we first spoke on the phone, I think it was evening my time, afternoon yours. And once you confirmed that you could be a part of this, I shared it with my colleagues at the Skoll Foundation, many of whom have children that watch your show. So there are a lot of young people watching us right now because you're a part of this program. Princess, if you could talk about, if you can recall, when the first time you saw yourself reflected on screen or on television, and what that meant for you.
Yeah, well, I didn't see any positive or accurate, really, depictions of any Indigenous people or woman, really, until I saw Sheila Tousey in Thunderheart. And I was blown away because I was like, wow, that's my auntie. That is, what we look like. That is how we sound. We are three-dimensional human beings that bring so much to our communities. And so I think that was the first time. I'm also really fired up right now after seeing that trailer and just being a part of this conversation, because I feel like what we are doing, in addition to decentering whiteness as, as content creators, is we're also decentering the human to a certain extent and recognizing that we have to bring back humility. We share our Mother Earth with all of these other plants and animals, our relatives. And we're at this pivotal point in history where we need to be better relatives, that we need to restore balance. And when I see people really highlighting community organizing, community organizing is based on bringing our voices together, bringing community together in a way that is grounded in prayer, and it's grounded in principles, and asking ourselves, why are we coming together? Why are we creating this film? Why are we creating this television series? How are we doing it in the most inclusive way, in a way that is coming from a decolonized model, which to me is we are uprooting those characteristics of white supremacy, those characteristics of urgency that says that we don't have time for inclusion, or paternalism, or we have to get it right all the time. I feel like, you know, we've in our society, and the divisiveness in our society, it's like, no, it's okay to be wrong. We are not always going to be right about everything. And again, like bringing that humility, what are the ways in which we are coming together at the start of a production, and creating the agreements and the honoring the different epistemologies, the different ways of knowing and being that we, as Indigenous people or whatever community, right, bring to a project. And so I'm just really, you know, Pat talked about power and how it's held. That's so key. You know, who are our allies? How do we be better allies to one another? Nick was, you know, touching on intersectionality. And we're just at this incredible moment where our stories can bring healing, so much healing. And, you know, there's that power of like imagination. If we can imagine it, then we can create it. And that's, you know, that call to action, you know, from Amanda Gorman's poem. And it's like, we need to be that light. Like we need to be unbridled in that.
Yeah, absolutely, Princess. I'm with you 100%, 100%. But for those who don't have children of age to watch Molly Denali or don't know the program, I'm going to cue a trailer just so they get an introduction of what you have birthed with children's television programming on PBS. So we'll cue the trailer now for Molly Denali.
Hey everyone, it's me, Molly. So there's this canoe race in Alaska where different schools compete in 3-person teams. And I realized, hey, Tui, Trini, and I are 3 people. Hi! Howdy! So we formed a team called the Kaya Canoers. And we're filming our first practice to show you how amazing we already are. Okay, Kaya Canoers, forward ho! No, Trini, the other forward. I thought this was forward. No, that's starboard. Start what? I thought this was starboard. That was not what I meant by amazing.
I love it, Princess. That's amazing.
It brings me so much joy. It brings me so much joy.
I'm curious, that I imagine it was the case, but I'm curious, your colleagues, the team that produces Molly Denali, are they also Alaska Native or representative of the larger Indigenous community?
Yeah, so we have an amazing advisory group that is comprised of members of our community, including elders, but our main production team that launched the series, we have one other Alaska Native person on our team, Sydney Isaacs, but also my sister friend, Mia Olafemi. I got to give her a shout out. She's amazing. And she really was critical to just, you know, for me, it's really important as often as possible that we are not the only person of color in the room. And so really, you know, she was somebody who was a springboard, confident, and a pillar in helping get the series launched.
I want to bring in our colleagues, Charles King, Dr. Ariana Curtis, in the conversation as well, and also invite those who are watching us to feel free to ask questions in the chat. One of the questions that's percolated is for Charles specifically. And the question is, Charles, how does macro help expand the kind of same kind of advocacy on the buyer side, especially for larger buyers who don't see the stories of non-white communities as marketable?
How do we expand?
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things. One, we probably raise more capital so that we can do what we've been doing on a larger scale. We've been, not only producing, but we're financing. We've financed and produced over 12 years in the first 12 movies over the first 6 years of the company. And having a larger amount of capital will be able to put us in a place to make more content, but also to finance and produce movies on a larger scale, as well as television with the larger proliferation of the streaming platforms, which we've been expanding our television studio, but we believe that that will also be a place of tremendous impact. And we also think heavily about the international marketplace, local language, and there's so many stories of from communities of color on a global level that have yet to be seen around the world, and have these stories be told by those communities as well. So these are things we think about as we look to scale and grow the brand that will hopefully, in business, that will have impact on a global level.
Thank you, Charles. That was a very specific question for you, as you could probably tell from some of the audience. I have a question for all three of you, actually. It's one, I've been grappling with it. I kind of alluded to this in my opening remarks. And this is very subjective, obviously, but I'm curious if you could speak to the impact of, I'll say, harmful or toxic narratives of storytelling. Earlier I made reference to, those Westerns from John Wayne and, European white men portraying, a Chinese detective named Charlie Chan and, Latino maids and gardeners with broken English. Again, very personal, very specific question. I'm just curious if you all can speak to, in your respective communities, or all of our shared narrative, what you think was the impact of that on how we see ourselves.
I guess I'll.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, Princess and then Ariana. Okay.
I know growing up, I just felt invisible. We were, in the public school system, I didn't learn anything about Alaska Native history. There was nothing in the cities that I was in Anchorage or Fairbanks, that gave homage to no statues. There was nothing to honor or recognize us. And certainly those images that we saw since the beginning of cinema of Native people, it couched us in the past. And so growing up, I even had people when I went to the East Coast that would tell me things like, oh, I didn't even know that there were any more Native people around. And when I went, I did a study abroad in China. And I remember talking to people and they would say, oh, you're Indian, you're American Indian. And they would go, ah, because that's what they saw in the media. So I think it was, for me, very damaging, and those stereotypes continue to impact us today.
Yes. Yeah, I know Crystal Echohawk at Illuminative, that's one thing they're working on, just dismantling those depictions. Ariana, I think you were gonna make a statement as well.
Yeah, I was, that made me think of two things. The first is that how it is that we have to present ourselves in contrast to those narratives. For me as a scholar, I've talked about this before, but I do get a little bit annoyed because I think that whiteness then becomes universal, and our contributions, people do not recognize our contributions beyond the limits of our lived experiences, right? And so if I'm asked questions as an Afro-Latina. I was like, yes, I'm Afro-Latina, I'm African-American, but why we're speaking is because I'm a Smithsonian curator. And so acknowledging my expertise and what I bring to this world beyond just the limited way in which people see me in relationship to whiteness. I think that's one of the things. And one of the things that I've really just appreciated about how you structured this panel and how you carefully worded things is that, one of the questions was, what happens when historically underrepresented groups create space for their stories in the national narrative? And that is a very different question than what happens when historically underrepresented groups are included. right? Because there is an intentionality there. There's an action there. There's a place in which we are landing our stories, which is an acknowledgement that we have been telling our stories, right? And so just because they haven't been widely seen or they haven't been considered part of the national narrative doesn't mean that this isn't work that we have been doing. And so I wanted to just point those things out because I do think that there's a lot of people who are well-intentioned, but just in the way that they phrase things or in the way that they approach, just reify this universality of whiteness or invisibility of whiteness at worst.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question for all three, and I think that probably Charles and Princess can answer this best, but I'll ask it of all three of you. One of the questions an audience member asked, how do parents especially, but how do we all contextualize or treat, in their words, problematic segments of classic narratives, public consciousness? The questioner is referring specifically to Disney Plus, moving films like Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Song of the South, from kids' profiles to parents-only profiles.
Wow, that's a very good question. So I have two sons. They're 13 and 12. And I just think the other night we've been watching Cobra Kai. And then we just went back and watched the original Karate Kid. And it just made me think about how many things I watched growing up, many of which were just, I can't believe I watched certain things. I remember I used to watch the Dukes of Hazzard as a kid with my sister, and I'm like, it's unbelievable with the Rebel song and the whole thing. And that was it. That was literally in my consciousness. Now, I think we can't run away from the fact that that's part of our history. I think it's about the conversation the communities and people are having with their kids. Like, here's what used to happen. Here's shows that were there. Look at how that was worded and how we're presented. But this is the way it should be. You notice the difference here, the authenticity. You see who's telling that story instead of someone else telling your story for you. And so I would intend to not run from it. And I would hope that other communities would think similarly. I do believe that education and those conversations it starts at home.
What role, piggybacking on that, Charles, I'm adapting a question that's from the audience. Again, it's for all three of you, or whoever wants to respond. Piggybacking on what you just said, Charles, what is the role of in decentering whiteness? What is the role of white filmmakers, white writers, white storytellers, white curators?
I'm one who does believe in mission alignment. And I believe that let's say, even for macro, like we have a very diverse organization, but people of color and their stories are at the center of our company and our mission. That doesn't mean that someone who's not white can't be a part of the company. Someone who's white my first head of production was white, and she was very much mission aligned. But the makeup of the larger body of our organization, as well as the center of our stories and the filmmakers and the writers behind it are. I believe that there are scenarios where a white writer, a co-writer, a director, perhaps if the producing unit and others around them are people from the community and can bolster. But I do believe you need to have this strong ecosystem and the visionaries behind making those narratives should be from that community. I think for them to be as authentic as they possibly can be.
I don't really have much to add because I agree with all of that. I think that, in addition to that, like what I mentioned before, it's really important that with our allies, that we have that shared understanding of history and what are the agreements that we're making, as we move forward with the creation of any project.
Yeah, I just want to chime in on that because I think that's really important, what both of my fellow panelists are saying. And to the impact of that, right? It's breaking this idea that there's a singular true narrative and instead presenting this idea of multiple perspectives and multiple interpretations and complexity, right? Our racial identity is not even the only identity that we inhabit and that we embody, and so it's important to think about the stories that we tell as full human stories, and having multiple voices and multiple interpretations present, but still being able to center the experience that you're centering. And so I don't think it's an exclusive experience. And we really have to break this idea that there aren't multiple perspectives and complexity in everything that we want to create and build.
Thank you, Ariana, for that addition. And thank you, Charles, and Princess as well. Princess, one of the questions that's been asked is, and I think you're particularly positioned to answer this one, is what advice or recommendations would you give to other Indigenous Native storytellers who are, wanting to get, other content on children's television programming or on TV shows or just in the larger quote unquote mainstream media? Any lessons from your pathway that could be applicable for others?
Well, we're seeing an explosion of Indigenous content, as Crystal mentioned, and we can constantly. We're all lifelong learners. Like, we can constantly be honing our craft and honing our skills, and then the other element is just how we, shine theory. How do we lift each other up? How do we support one another? I don't know what I would have done in my career without those people that I've been able to reach out and, ask a question to, that I have no idea, right? Like, we're still trying to find our way. And so I would just encourage people to really dig deep into like what it is, that they want to do. I'm definitely a alumni and product of Sundance Film Institute, in the sense that I went through that first Native lab that, Heather Ray and Bird Running Water were instrumental in creating. And so, Sundance has been promoting and seeing the value of diversity for a really long time. So those type of programs, there's so many great programs out there. I would encourage people to investigate those.
Thank you, Princess. Sorry, Charles.
No, it chimed.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Oh, it's all good. Ariana, what particular barriers remaining barriers you see remaining for people of color seeking curatorial positions in museums and galleries? I'm sure as you recognize it yourself, there aren't many people who look like you in the museum space. So I'm just curious, and this is based on a question that was asked from the audience. What advice, what are the barriers that you see for people who are interested in museum and curation work?
When I present, particularly when I present as a curator, I really do try and start all of my presentations with the numbers, so that I think there's this idea that the arts and culture field is a diverse field, and it's not. And so if I can remember, I didn't write any of them down, but if I can remember, it's like 93% of museum directors are white. Like 84% of leadership positions, including curatorial, nationwide, are held by white people. And so being a Black curator, being an Afro-Latina curator, I've had to just be very public about that in a way that, Pat Mitchell can attest. She was one of my speaking coaches for TED, and she just had to like pull all nuggets of personal information out of me because I don't like to make it about me. Like, I need to see myself, and that's why these roles are important, right? The point is that there are millions of people who are omitted from these spaces, and that's why it's important. But I think just in terms of access I think a lot of curators, we understand our rarity, frankly, and making ourselves accessible. I do keep a few open social media accounts just for that kind of informal engagement or mentorship, or people just wondering what it takes to get into a museum career. Because I myself, frankly, didn't know what a curator did until I was in graduate school. And I was lucky enough to meet an extrovert, Michelle Wilkinson, who's now my colleague, but she wasn't at the time, that just came up to me and started chatting at a reception. And I was like, oh, the universe is speaking to me, because this was a place in which I wanted to learn more about the profession and just didn't know how. But before we can even talk about curators, right? Because most curators at the Smithsonian, not all, but many have doctorates. And so there's the whole leaky pipeline, right? To even the number of people of color who have doctorates, period, is less than 10% of earned doctorates are Black people. Things like 7% are Latinx, even though we know Latinx is not a race. People who identify as two or more races is like 2%, right? Of all doctorates conferred in a year. And so there's just a lot of work that we have to do socially for people to know that these careers exist, to know how it is that you get into these careers, but also that these spaces are open to people who look like me. And I think, having Lonnie Bunch as the secretary of the Smithsonian, having an Afro-Latina leading a race initiative for the Smithsonian Institution is how we make these institutional big visibility statements that this is a place for you. not just a place for your stories, but a place for you as a content creator. And so that's a long answer, but.
No, it's the right answer we needed. Thank you, Ariana, for that so much. I'm gonna one last question. I know we're time, but I'm gonna ask one more question. I think it's important because I want to honor your respective journeys. I know I have an idea what it took to get to where you all are at this point in your journeys. And I want to ask, as much as you're willing to do so, if you can speak to I won't say burden, but the responsibility, the weight of the responsibility and opportunity to be in the respective fields that you are, to represent us, Alaskan Natives, Black men, Afro-Latina arts and culture experts, scholars. If you can speak to the trauma, speak to the baggage that you have to carry to do this work.
Woo.
I come hard, Princess. I'm sorry.
When do you guys want to go first?
Oh man. Yeah, there's some trauma. There's a lot of emotional labor. There's also the strength of knowing that our ancestors are with us and that we have purpose and that the struggles of our ancestors were not for naught. We are here to carry out and to continue to contribute to this experience of being human and to life. And so I think it's a gift. It's a gift to have all of this, life experience. And I would just say, I keep my ancestors in mind, and that's what keeps me going.
Yeah, I second that, absolutely. I will say that for me, building spaces of vulnerability have been hard. And I think people sometimes misinterpret that as, I'm just a very private person. I'm like, yeah, I find that's true, but they're not always safe spaces in which we work, and so just acknowledging that, and being public and honest about that, I think is healing and affirming for everyone who has similar experiences in the arts and culture field or outside of it. And so when I talk about my professional success, I like to make sure that people understand the institutional decisions that open that space for me, because it was not happenstance, right? And my being the first person in these positions is because I was lucky enough to be alive at the time when these spaces opened, right? Not because I'm the only Afro-Latino who was ever qualified to do it. And so I think that's, just being able to acknowledge that I have a doctorate because of the Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship program that recruited me, that there was a Latino curatorial initiative at the Smithsonian Institution, and I was part of that first cohort in 2013, that the National Museum of African American History and Culture opened, right, that it exists. And I was able to be a curator in that space. That in June 2020, the Smithsonian, under the direction of the first Black secretary, said, we are putting our stake in the ground around race and systemic racism. And that I am able to be the director of content for that initiative, right? But these are very recent and active choices that have opened that space. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that when we're saying someone is the first, it's because we were able to be alive when that space opened, and that we take that responsibility of opening space for everyone behind us very seriously.
I would jump in and say that was very powerful, and I would definitely concur with what both Princess and Ariana said. I live the existence and breathe it every day of understanding the blessed position that I'm in, and that there were so many others who blazed the trail and opened up that door for me. So when I became the first African-American partner in the history of Hollywood at a major agency, there were hours and hours every week that I would meet with young filmmakers, writers, actors, people wanting to be agents, entertainment lawyers. And I look at the impact of those informational meetings and the mentorship of the hundreds of people who are now all throughout the industry. And we're doing the same thing in the launch of Macro and having such great partners who, invested in our company and our vision. But we've had over 150 interns come through Macro in just a 6-year period of time. How many of them have been hired or now executives on our project, overseeing movies getting accepted to Sundance Film Festival, but then the 149 others that are all throughout the industry who are making a shift and are part of it. And so I also realized that we have there's a higher bar for us. And I recognize that I must succeed in order for it to make it that much easier for that next entrepreneur who wants to launch a media company or producer or agent or whatever that may be. And so I live with that every single day and make sure that I continue to conduct myself so that I can, make my ancestors proud, as well as continue to open up the door for others.
Yes. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Princess. Thank you, Ariana. I think ultimately, with what you've all said, we can close on the note with understanding that we all rise together, and that each one teach one. We're always bringing those behind us with us. I want to thank our convening partners again: Tulane, Monica, Nick, Crystal, for your allyship, for your energy, your passion. Pat, thank you for the mentorship, the energy, the blessing for this conversation. For those in the audience, thank you for staying with us 6 months over. Appreciate that, your presence, and again, enjoy the Sundance Festival, and we will continue to do our work here at the Skoll Foundation and allyship with everyone on this call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joy to the world, joy to the world. This a message to the black little boys and girls. And I ain't tryna exclude nobody else, but I wanna tell my kids they should let it show. You gon' feel some things ain't nobody else felt. You gon' play the cards ain't nobody else dealt. You gon' wonder why don't nobody else help. I tell you the truth and give you the proof, that's how we all felt. And I ain't gonna lie, it gets hard when they reminisce over you. My God, my God, my God on my side with the weight of the world. Keep your shoulders broad. It's like this and like that and like this and First they gon' tell you that you play too much. Then they try to say that you act too tough. Then they try to tell you you ain't black enough. Look at the black boy joy, look at the black girl magic. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't. Look at the black boy joy, look at the black girl magic. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't. It's been a while since I seen myself smile for real. Had regrets in my past, only time could kill. I wish that I could heal all the pain I felt, and so I use my life as weaponry and aim myself as a positive shot in a darker light that would aim, that would spark the mind and put change in your heart, design and refine and restart. I mean, if iron sharpens iron, I'm keeping it sharp, and I am just an iron cause I'm knocking out wrinkles of thought. I thought showing emotion was soft, lo and behold the pillow was playing it off. I was trying to be hard instead of trying to be like God. Having joy is like magic when you're trying to beat the odds. Like this and like that and like this and First they gon' tell you that you play too much. Then they try to say that you act too tough. Then they try to tell you you ain't black enough. Look at the black boy joy, look at the black girl magic. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't. Look at the black boy joy, look at the black girl magic. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't have it. End of the day, what you got, they can't. It's like this and like that and like this and First they gon' tell you that you play too much. Then they try to say that you act too tough. Then they try to tell you you ain't black, and it's like this and like that and like this and First they gon' tell you that you play too much. Then they try to say that you act too tough. Then they try to tell you you ain't black, and it's like enough. Too much. Too tough. Black enough. It's enough. Too much. Too tough. Enough.